Hey, everybody, welcome to The Intentional Optimists. We are in our guest speaker live series today, and I have a special guest in the studio. Well, sort of in her studio. This is Marsha Vanwynsberghe. Welcome so much.
Well, oh, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
We have a special studio. It looks different, but it's all in one place. We were joking a minute ago before we went live about how this is where I get to spill my coffee and this is where we have fun. But if you have not heard Marsha's story on the podcast this week, it is episode 102. And pretty much anywhere on my social media this week, you're going to see the link to that episode. But the Intentional Optimists, Unconventional Leaders podcast is available in pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts. And it is episode 102, and it's titled Radical Responsibility. And we're going to get into that a little bit because Marsha is a storytelling business coach. And she told us her story on my podcast. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to tell your story and why that makes you a better business owner, better able to share, or a better speaker. So Marsha, for anybody who didn't listen to the episode, just give us a brief background, like a brief bio.
Perfect. Thank you so much again for having me. Brief bio. I have been in this field for about 5-6 years. It was my most difficult experience that led me here. I was a parent dealing with teen substance abuse, and I found myself hiding from the world and not living my best life. And it took me taking radical responsibility of myself to help to heal, learn how to speak, learn how to share my story. And in the process of doing so, I stumbled into the work that I get to do today, which is literally helping people to learn how to heal, own, and write their stories. And we're opening up, we are literally creating space to talk about vulnerable stories, the difficult stories, the actual stories that connect us the most to each other. And we're normalizing these conversations. So I absolutely love what I do. I have 2 podcasts, Own Your Choices, Own Your Life. We are like episode 450, and I get to interview you next week.
Yeah.
Yep. And 450. And my other podcast is Everybody Holds a Story. And I'm beyond passionate about stories. Like, this is just a big part of what I am here to do.
Everybody own the story. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I'm putting that in there. So I just want to make sure I have it correctly. Is that right? Everybody owned the story?
Everybody or everybody is 2 separate words. Hold. Yeah. Hold. So a separate story. Yeah. A separate word. And then holds a story, because truth be known, again, since it's all about storytelling, that was how this, and it's holds, not owns, but that's okay. We don't shoot for perfectionism anywhere here. None of us do. But that's actually, that podcast came out of me going through the experience of finding out I had to have a very invasive back surgery in 2020 and working on myself. And that was actually an experience I had to go through, because I recognized that we can't just think our way to change our stories. Some people are carrying massive amounts of trauma inside their bodies. So that story, that podcast is really about the stories that our body holds on to. So still centers around stories, but just in a different focus.
Well, and that's something that I've been learning about recently in my book club. Actually, I think it's next week's solo podcast that comes out. I talk about this a little bit, but we actually read the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And if you haven't read that book, it's part textbook, part...
It's heavy, but it's powerful.
It's only this thick, but and there's a lot in there that's really heavy. But one of the things it did for me was it helped me understand that trauma and the way your body holds that story doesn't have it's not just for people who have PTSD from a war zone, and it's not just for violent victims, and it's not just for people who have been through a terrible car crash. Everything that you go through, your body remembers all of it. And so it was very eye-opening for me. But is this so here's the other piece I want to go back to. One of the questions I ask people is, how did you step into this leadership position? Is it something that you dreamt about or you were shoved into? And I love the word you used, you stumbled into it.
I did stumble. I did. And I actually think that's a blessing, to be completely honest, that I stumbled into it. A lot of people step in going, I want to start the business. I want to create the business. And one of the first questions I like to ask is like, who are you? What have you lived through? What experience do you have? What lessons do you know? And it's so funny because people are like, no, that I don't have anything to do with the business. I'm like, but you do, you are the business. You're always the business, whether you have coaching, mentoring, brick and mortar, product, service base, you are the business. You're the face behind it. So your story is important. And this is where it can get people confused. But I did stumble into it. I was trying to find a way out of a very difficult time for myself. And in doing so, I recognized how few people were talking about difficult stories. And so then I found myself speaking on small stages, then larger stages, and then writing collaborative chapters, and then writing my own book in 2017. And I still, at this point, was still just working my way through. And it wasn't until after my book release and into 2018 that I started to get messages from people saying, but how do you share a story? And I'm like, well, you have to do this and this and this and this. And so many people would say, that's actually something you could coach others on. And I was like, oh, I get it. Like I actually wasn't in my radar, but now I couldn't imagine doing anything else. I couldn't imagine.
And that's the best kind of business, right? I mean, when it's something that is so naturally you and
Mhm.
that someone points out to you, these are your strengths. This is what I do as an executive coach. Is like, what are your natural strengths? What are your natural proclivities? What are the experiences that you have? When all of that comes together in this lovely little Venn diagram, and it's right here, it says storytelling business coach, right? And I
Yeah.
love that. That's
Yeah.
and Marsha, that too is something that helps other people, other women, especially hear that the experiences that they've been through, like you said, your hard experience of teen substance abuse, it it doesn't have to be they have a college education in this and they have this business experience in that. It could be what they've been through in their personal life can actually be their next business.
100%. And the reason I just want to piggyback on what you just said is the fact that like the tagline I use all the time is that someone somewhere is praying for the solutions you're holding on to. Like
Mm,
whatever you are
yeah,
going to Google for on a regular basis, if you are stuck in something, that there's a reason that you're doing that. There's like someone else is doing the same thing. Someone else is looking for a solution. And I really firmly believe that when you find your way through a difficult solution, those lessons that you learn, they aren't for you any longer. They're actually for you to pay it forward. I
yeah.
realize that that is not how everyone feels, and that's completely fine. But here's the thing is that like when there comes that time, it's like, wait, I was that person who was praying for these answers years ago. Like
Mm,
I was that person who was looking. What would it have done for the time it took me to navigate through this if one person was talking about this? What would have happened? Because I was searching. I was on Google
mm,
constantly looking for answers. So I believe there's 2 points to this. I believe that if you feel called to share your story and you feel like you want to do something positive with it, then it's a responsibility that you have to learn how to do that. If you're listening to this and you're like, I don't want to speak on stage and I don't want to write a book and do a podcast, you don't have to. But what I would ask you to ask yourself is, does your story hold you back in your life from living the life that you're meant to live? So if your story, the meaning that you're giving your story, the meaning of what you have lived through is blocking you from all of the things that are available for you, then it is having an effect on you. It is having an impact. So you don't have to stand up and publicly share it, but don't let it hold you back from living the life you're meant to live.
we would like to think that our story doesn't affect our life. I have discovered
It's not one person. It's not one. I guarantee you.
it's like women get to a certain age and we start rolling our eyes at other people. And I don't know what your age is, but I started doing that about 10 years ago.
Yep.
And so I just have, and I'm a coach, right? So here's another piece is that none of us are exempt from this. And none of us, even you, me, none of us are exempt. And I thought I had kind of reconciled all the pieces of my story. And it wasn't until, the biggest one was the fact that I grew up in Korea. And it's weird. You wouldn't think that would be one that would need to be reconciled, but it means I'm a third culture kid. It means that I see the world through a different lens than other people.
Yes,
It
you do.
means that that I'm not truly American and I'm not truly Korean. I grew up in this expatriate community, a missionary community. So there were all these different things that shaped who I was. And
Mhm.
I found too that a lot of other third culture kids, because we don't know what to do with ourselves, we just kind of like push that back here and we pretend it doesn't exist, and we become the perfect Americans. And but recently, so I'm learning to reconcile that and deal with it and tell my story. And it became a big catalyst for the way I explain my business. But the
Mm.
other piece that I'm realizing that I didn't even notice until my birthday this year, we went down to a local thing to hear a band, and I found myself weeping. And I was like, what is wrong with me? And then I realized, I'm looking at this woman up on stage, and I thought, I think that when I was 21, I thought that was going to be me. I have a music
Mhm.
business degree. I worked for record companies. I worked in,
Wow.
yeah. And, I went to school in Nashville and I did recording and all kinds of stuff. But it's kind of like a high school or a college football player realizing they're not going to be a professional.
Mhm.
I had friends and roommates who went on to have quite big careers. Right down the hall from me was Leanne Womack, who, I Hope You
Really?
Dance. And yeah, so I went to Belmont University in Nashville. And so I watched people like that. And I kept thinking it was going to be me. Now, it just wasn't that wasn't my path, but
Mhm.
I didn't realize that that was yet one more piece of my story that I had not dealt with and not reconciled. So, does it affect your life? It may not be that it's keeping you from getting a job, but it might actually be that it's keeping you from enjoying life. I think that's a relevant
100%.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's why I just always say, like, ask yourself that question and know. And if I would have asked you even like before your birthday, you might have went, no, that's fine. But what happens in that experience, it brings up emotion, and our bodies hold on to the emotions
Oh, yeah.
of what we are holding on to. And so yes, there was a part of you that felt that. And I think that is part of your story. Like, it's still all part of your story. It doesn't have to be. I think we also fall into this trap of, oh, well, she's had so much more trauma than I've had, so her story is
Right.
more important than mine. And that's not true. That's not true, because you can put two people through the exact same scenario. They will respond differently, not because one is better than the other. They will
Mhm.
respond differently because they're different people.
Right.
And so it really is, I think we have to get out of the culture of mine's not as bad as hers. And so therefore I can't share. I don't think that
Yeah.
serves anybody.
So what is the biggest we kind of played around with this idea that telling our stories, like, okay, so I'm gonna start this off with a story of mine that will, I hope, launch into this whole area that we can talk about. I have now been telling my story of bulimia and depression, and I went into when I turned 21. I turned 20, no, 20 or 20. Anyway, I had a birthday in a 12-week program. And it was the first time that we'd ever done group therapy. My parents came in and I wanted to talk about some things. I was like, you don't know me. Mom's like, I've known you since the day you were born. What's your problem? And, um, but what it came down to was we don't air our dirty laundry in front of
Yeah.
anybody.
Yeah.
And, my dad was a pastor, my parents were missionaries, and then so that becomes even more compounded. It's like, now we
Mhm.
really don't tell our stories. People might think we're not good enough to be missionaries. I'm like, who's
Mhm.
good enough to be? Now I look around and I'm like, thank goodness. But at the time, this is back in the late 80s. And so my mother got up and left, like completely just got up. She's like, I'm out of here. And she got up and left. And I went chasing her, and I'm an inpatient. They stopped me and they're like, she'll be back. And I was inconsolable. I said, she will not be back. I will never see my mother again. I mean, that was kind of how I thought.
Of
Now,
course.
that was 30 years ago, and we worked through all of that. Before the end of the program, she worked she worked through some of that. But it's this idea that we don't air our dirty laundry and we don't tell our stories. And I'm sure that when you start working with people, all this kind of stuff's going to come up, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. And especially, I don't know what generation to say this is for. I think that our kids are growing up hearing more and more people speak about difficult things.
Mhm.
But I also think that there are some mistakes that are being made when people are sharing some difficult stories, which I can tap into in a second.
Okay.
But I do think that when I first started to speak and share and write, because it's different to stand on stage and speak and put something in writing that's
Sure,
always
sure,
going
sure.
to be there.
Yeah.
And when I first started to do this, I literally had everyone around me say, like, "You're insane. That's insane.
Mm.
What are you doing? What are you doing? We don't talk about difficult things. We put our smile on, we put it under the rug, and we just move on." And all I could think was, but maybe that's why we're here. Like, maybe
Mhm.
that's why we're in this space where we're so isolated, because I kept finding more and more, like more and more people that were feeling the same thing, living the same story, experiencing these same emotions, but nobody was talking. And I think one of the biggest moments for me was one of my really first talks. I got absolutely bombarded in the washroom by women who were in tears saying, "That's my story, but I've never told a soul. Like, I've lived that for 30
Mm.
years, 40 years, 50 years. I've
Mm.
never told a soul." And I just thought, the reason that shame has such a power over all of us is because we give it the power. We give it the power. We keep it
Mhm.
alive. So we either keep the story alive, we either give our power to the story, or we give our power back to ourselves. And I just started to feel that, like, something had to change. And when I was doing counseling myself, the counselor said to me, like, you sound very frustrated. I said, because I'm constantly looking for people who have lived this experience and I can't find it and nobody wants to talk about it. And she said, maybe
Mm.
that's what you're supposed to. And I just went, what? Like, me. And then all of a sudden it just opened up possibility, right? Your subconscious mind, it opened up possibility that maybe I am supposed to talk about this. Maybe I
Mm.
am supposed to do something with this. And as I started to do that, I felt like it was supporting others and it was helping others and it was helping me heal selfishly. It was doing both. And so, yes, I agree. It really bothers a lot of people that we talk about difficult things. But I would also challenge and say that we're into episode 450. So is there a shortage of people who have difficult stories that they don't want to talk about it? No, there's not. There's
No.
not. So that was it. People even said, why would you start a podcast? Who is going to come on and talk about those stories? Yep. That's all I'm going to say. I think it's a new paradigm and I think it's a new space. I think we're
Yeah.
creating a space and I'm grateful to be a part of it. Honestly, I really am.
It's courageous women like you that are willing to do this kind of work, that are willing to have people push back, that
Mhm.
are willing to have people come at you.
Mhm.
And,
They
um,
don't know though that that's actually, I'm like, it's the wrong person because that actually feeds me. That actually feeds me. Well good.
they don't know.
No,
That's
they don't know.
why you were created to do this work because
Yep.
you're not going to back down.
No.
And so kind of walk us through a little bit of you said you were going to touch on this in a minute, but walk us through a little bit of how this works and how what we do.
Yeah, great. First thing I would say is, like, just recognize that every single person has a story. Again, going back to the beginning, that we don't quantify that yours isn't as big as somebody else, etc. Because we're all here for a purpose. Every single one of us, we have a purpose of what we're meant to do. So we all have a story. And what happens is I like to take people through, like what have you lived through? What have you come through? What have you experienced? What are some of the lessons that you've learned? What are the things that make you the expert that you could teach on and you could probably get up and speak about with no notes?
Hmm.
And how can you tap into the experience of the story, not the details of the story? So this is where it gets really, just to clarify for a lot of people, when you just heard me share my story, that's pretty much the extent of what I share. I don't share a lot of the other challenging pieces because they're not mine to share. And
Hmm.
and I think that's the really important piece, is that we should always be able to share a story and leave anyone else who's involved in it in integrity.
Yeah.
That definitely creates some pushback for some people. I can't control how other people are going to take it, but I can definitely control how I share it. And so what happens is, it's like, how can I share the experiences, the lessons that I learned, And what difference would they have made in my life later if I would have like had some, or earlier, if I would have had somebody who would have been speaking and sharing that. And then I think the other big piece is again, we get so caught up in the details of like who did what and
Oh,
all of these
yeah.
pieces. I like to keep it really simple. You're either in the story or on the story. When you're in the story, you're in the space of, unfortunately, you're a victim of the story. You're replaying the scenarios over and over. Whose fault was it? Who are you blaming? Who's responsible, etc. None of that changes the story. Just saying, it never changes it. So if
Yeah.
a person is in that space, I mean, I usually just say that's the time we dive into personal development. You dive into like podcasts. There's lots of free resources because you want to be able to shift your role in the story. As Stephen Covey says, and I always refer his quote, but we are not a product of our circumstances. We're a product of our decisions.
Hmm.
You can walk through a tremendously difficult story and still come out the other side because you are doing something with it. You are deciding how you respond. So all of those things come together to start to look at it. And the other thing I want to share with this is that it's not, again, not the details of the story, but we connect as humans with emotions, right? Pain, emotions,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
experiences. So even as you just explained how you remember vividly when your mom was leaving, and
Hmm.
you explained how you went through a 12-step program, I can relate to the feelings just you let show there
Mm.
without ever having walked your story. And I
Mm.
think that's the piece that we miss is that, and I didn't know that until I started. I thought I was only going to be working with parents who were dealing with the same story.
Okay.
And that's not what was happening. I was getting all these other people reaching out to me who could recognize my emotions, my experiences, and they related. See, we become this mirror to others. And we're
Right.
this mirror that we show them what is possible. So learning how to tap into those pieces, you start to understand like what is it that you're the expert of? What could you speak about with no notes? Because you actually do know because you've lived through it, right? We all embrace personal development. I love personal development, but there are just some things that you just can't read in a book. You have to live them in order to fully understand and be able to do something with it. So those are a lot of the pieces that we come through.
Yeah.
And really, I mean, yeah, it's trial and error. How I share now is different than when I first started. But I can really see now when a person comes in, if they're like, I'm ready to do something with my story, I ask them where they're at. Ask them to explain. And within minutes, I'm like, you're still in it. And if you're
Mm.
in it, right, that's the scar on the wound. If you're in it, it's really hard to heal and share at the same time. It's
Mm.
actually really hard to do both. Not impossible, but it's really hard to do both. You want to be able to come from a space that when you are sharing your story or sharing who you are, your lessons, the experiences, that you are on your story. And when you're on your story, you have perspective. You can look at it
Mm.
and say, I am never disrespecting that some people have walked through horrific trauma.
Right.
I just know that I wouldn't be the person I am today if I hadn't lived through that. I
Right.
wouldn't do the work I do today. I'm not saying that we need to be grateful for every single difficulty. I am grateful for the experience and what I've learned because
Right.
it's made me a different person. When we are on our story, it is much easier to share from that space. That is when we can have perspective. We can affect and impact and influence others in a
Hmm.
very positive way. When you're in your story and you're stuck in it and you try to share from that space, unfortunately, if you don't want to stay in that space, that's all you're going to attract. You're going to attract
Right.
more people who are angry about their circumstances.
Right.
And we all know, like on the sliding scale of emotions, anger is way down here, right? Like it's
Hmm.
actually like it's just way down here. No change is going to come from that space. It's only going to hurt you. So I encourage people to like make that change through. I do believe anybody can do this. And I do believe some people never will because it's easier to hold on to that anger and resentment than it is to let go because letting go is really scary. It's really scary to allow yourself to be seen,
Yeah.
right? It is scary. I understand that. So again, it's not a judgment. It's just recognizing that we all fit in different parts along that journey. But if you are somebody who says, oh, I would love to be able to share in a podcast or write a book or speak about it, then just ask yourself those questions of what I just shared. Where are you in that journey?
Yeah.
because that's a key part. I mean, it took me a long time to navigate through that.
Well, and I'll say from experience that I don't know that I would have ever called it what you call it, but from experience and a personal growth coach, I can say that with everything that happens now, like even I had something happen yesterday, and I'm learning now to work through that and let go of that anger faster. Like,
Yes.
my son and I talk about, well, you still didn't obey perfectly, but the time lapse between the gap between the doing the thing and the not doing the thing, it was shorter and shorter and shorter. And that's actually very encouraging to be able to go to bed knowing that I was struggling with anger, but worrying, figuring out how to let go of it, waking up in the morning and saying, okay, I really can let go of this, and I really can. And then be able to share, and I don't share all of the stuff with all the
You don't
people,
have
but I have
to.
a few people that are, it does help to have somebody to talk to. And I share with a couple of people, and it's, I'm actually away from that. I'm, as you put it, I'm on it
Yep.
now rather than
Yep.
in it. And those were small things, but a year ago they would have sent me spiraling. And you know,
I 100%. And I think that that's a great reflection, is like, that's growth. It doesn't mean you're not feeling it
right.
at all. It means that your reaction time changes. Like how you respond to something definitely changes. I used like to say that what used to take me out at the knees years ago is like a speed bump. I trip on it now,
Yes.
and it's like, what the heck? Oh yeah.
Oh
We
yeah.
all do that. That's old patterns. We're not doing that. But it's like we catch it. It's
Yes.
still there. We just don't stay there.
Yeah.
And you're right with all of those things. It's when you really start to dive into and understand what emotions are doing inside of your body.
Mm.
Um, and I mean, I encourage anybody to listen to Joe Dispenza if you have not, because he's so powerful when it comes to understanding our subconscious mind and what this looks like, which led me into doing my NLP, and now I'm finishing my master's, because it's very powerful work. Our body is holding on to emotions. If I think back to a very difficult situation that we walked through, it is no time that inside my body, it responds as though I'm already there. Like it
Yes.
responds as though I am there. So now I'm going through all of the emotions, all of the cortisol, all the adrenaline, all the heightened awareness. And that is not providing a solution. So I think the other thing he just recently said that I heard is that only 50% of what we remember is accurate. And it was like, oh my
Yeah.
God, 50% of what we remember is accurate. So if we are in a space of replaying
Hmm.
something, and we're humans, we get addicted to that adrenaline, that cortisol, that stress, we do. And when we're in that space and we constantly bring up those emotions again, now we're actually trapping ourselves in a cycle of something that actually didn't happen the way that we remember it happening.
Sure. And I mean, there's all kinds of documentation, witnesses for crimes, and especially if it's a traumatic thing, it's like
Mhm.
an eyewitness is not as great a witness as you think they are.
No.
And in reading that book, The Body Keeps the Score, it was very interesting to see how many people had like completely non-factual brains totally shut down, had nothing to do with what actually happened in different ways, but so many of them that just your brain processes things on purpose for a specific
Of
reason.
course it does,
And
because it tries
if
to
it's too
safety, right?
scary, yes, if it's too scary, then many
Mhm.
times our brains will just like short circuit and go, oh no, we're gonna like pretend that didn't happen, which is why you have victims coming forward who don't remember things from their childhood, and that kind of thing. But really quick, one of the pieces that I want to make sure that we actually touch on before we close out here today is the best way for us to be able to do this is to take what you call radical responsibility.
Mhm. I love this word. This phrase saved me. It literally did save me, to be honest. And radical responsibility is taking 100% responsibility for yourself, for your actions, reactions, thoughts, processes, everything that you are doing in your circumstance. And now I said radical responsibility. I didn't say blame, anger, frustration, judgment, criticism. It's not the same thing. And so what I mean by that is if you're a person who goes, yeah, I always do that. Like, that's just how I respond. I'm like, no, that's an excuse. That's actually not a response. And so when we're in that space, it's really powerful to recognize, like, am I owning my own choices,
Mhm.
or am I owning everyone else's choices? which is hence where my podcast name came from, because those words saved my life like 6 years ago, where I sat there and went, is this my choice? No, that's not my choice. That's not my choice. Humans are funny. What we end up doing is I'm going to pick on women for a second, because
Go for it. It's
we
who
are
we talk to
known for
mostly.
this. I love women. Okay. I love you dearly, but
we get to talk to ourselves. Go.
Yeah. Yeah. You do this. We take massive responsibility for everyone else, for all the choices, all the decisions. We are like fix-it people. We like to make sure everything is running smoothly for everyone. We like to get their barriers out of the way, the obstacles, and like make sure that life goes smoothly for the family. I get it. I do it too. But the thing is that we end up owning everyone else's choice. And then when it comes to ourselves and going, I have nothing left for me. I have nothing left for me to make change in my life. Well, that's because you're last on your choice of options, and because you're spending all your energy on things that we can't control. Now, there is some like reverse psychology that happens here. Sometimes we do this on purpose, and it becomes subconsciously, and then there's nothing left for ourselves. So I did this for years, and I finally realized that I am mad at everyone for not doing as I've asked, to not creating change, to not doing the things. Yeah. And now I'm mad at them because I'm in my worst shape that I've ever been. Not just physically, I'm talking physically, emotionally, mentally, all spaces. I didn't even recognize who I was anymore. And I was angry at everyone because I had nothing left for me. And then it was like, wait a minute. I'm spending every ounce of energy I have on everyone else. And there's no reason. Of course, there's nothing left for me because I'm 100% dead last. That won't create change. And so radical responsibility, and I still to this day do it. When anger comes up, when blame comes up, frustration comes up, I usually stop and go, wait, what am I doing? And what am I not owning? Because blame and ownership are the opposite ends of the spectrum. So if I am blaming someone else, there is something in there that I am not owning for even if it's just your response, right? We can't control others. So that is a daily check-in for me. It's like, what am I doing that is taking radical responsibility for myself? One quick thing on this: when you're in a space where you might just be going, she has no idea where I am in my life, and this is not even possible. When we are in a space when maybe demands are very high or boundaries and self-care are very low, this becomes an even bigger problem. So when I'm in a space of saying like, I just don't have any time for me. And I'm like, wait, what am I doing right now that is making it so I have no time for me? And I can see like 10 things immediately. It's like, these things, they're not even mine to own. So that comes back to, what do I need to be my best self? What boundaries do I need to be in place? Where can I ask for help and allow myself to receive? There's another for women. Where can I ask? And where can I allow myself to receive? And people say all the time, well, nobody helps me. I'm like, do you ask? Maybe you need to ask other people that you don't even realize. I've been in this position of having to ask, and it's been a game changer. So radical responsibility is really just learning, like, where can I take full responsibility for myself? Ironically, and I'm not saying that's what created change. Ironically, that is what everyone in our house had to do. If they want to create change, they had to take ownership for themselves. They had ownership for their decisions. And to this day, it has been the game changer in our life. And so I'm grateful that it is something that I revisit and check in on every day, is a space of radical responsibility without blame, judgment, criticism, we don't need to be harder on ourselves. We've already done that.
So I'm going to toss you back to the whole women. I don't have anybody to help. Well, did you ask? I shouldn't have to ask.
Sorry. I said those words. Said those words. Yep.
And if I have to ask, then they're going to do it out of obligation. And I want them to just love me enough to help me.
Okay. That is never a winning circle. Like, just so you're never going to come ahead. No, we've all said it. And we're going to own this.
I know.
But you're never going to come out ahead in your life if that's the mindset. And sometimes here's the thing. How are we asking? Are we mad and yelling at someone to say like, why aren't you doing anything? Well, I don't know you, but I don't respond very well to that tactic. So we tend to look at it. There have been times where we both look at it and it's like, okay, if that's how you want, like, if you want help, that's not the way to ask. And it's like, use your words. We're adults. Let's use our words. And it makes a big difference when you start to speak. Yeah, I know. We start to speak with respect and ask for what we want. Is it always perfect? No. But I can say the more often I live in that energy, the more energy I have for other things. Like that's a mind game and draining. And I know it because I've done it.
Yeah.
So learning to take responsibility and asking, and you know what, you'd be surprised how many people actually, I've been in multiple situations in my life, health challenges where I've had no choice but to rely on others for help. And they have been some of the biggest life lessons that I've had to learn, that
I love
it's
that.
like, it's okay to ask for help. I mean, the universe forced me to have to learn.
Yeah.
And that's literally what happened. So in that space, that's what happened. And I honestly, I'm grateful for the lessons, as hard as they have been.
Yeah. And the reality is we are designed to live in community. We are designed to
Yes, we
live,
are.
if you want to call it pack, it's like however you want to look at it. We are designed to live this way with other people, in family units, in communities. And
Mhm.
if we are not willing to, and it's so easy today, in this world where everything is digital online, and you and I are talking from very different places, and even though I joked about us being in the studio together, it would be nice. You're welcome to come visit, but
I love that.
yeah, but it's so easy for us to think that we are isolated, and we're really not. And go ahead.
No, it's exactly, if I just piggyback on that one thing there, is that the reason we feel that we're isolated is because we keep isolating ourselves.
And
Like,
yes,
yeah, yeah,
I was
we're
going to
doing
say, and I find that that's my own issue. And I
it. Mhm,
think 2+ years of COVID have taught us that.
mhm.
I joke with people. It's like, yeah, my husband and my son and I really tapped into our inner hermit for COVID. And we just enjoyed doing everything right here. And that was one of the reasons we went out for my birthdays. I said, I need to be around life. I
Yeah,
need to be around people. I
yeah.
need to see that the world is moving on. Yeah, we still got plenty of things that we have to do, but being willing to even just say to in our family, we're learning to do that too. My son is 13 and a half, he'll be 14. So he really doesn't respond well to the yelling. And that's my personal, when I was joking about slamming doors and yelling, that's me, right? It's like, I'm going to do it. And then I'm going to get passive aggressive about it. And then I'm going to yell about it. And then I'm going to slam a door, and a picture falls off a wall. That means I'm really angry. And, so learning how to, I even said to him the other day, I know you're a teenager and I know it's your job to push the boundaries. I need
Mhm.
you to help because my muscles have not developed in this area. I said, so you need to be aware when you're pushing that boundary and you can see it's about to snap. I said, that's when you need to stop and help me help you, right? Because I want you to grow up to be this amazing human. I want you to be an amazing adult. I want you to have everything you need, and I'm all here for it. But we have to work together. And so he'll even every once in a while he'll say something and I'll look at him and he'll go, no, seriously, we're good.
Oh,
But it's
but that's
teaching.
huge.
Yeah, and it's teaching those things before it gets out of hand.
Mhm.
And we're older parents, and we have one child, so we have kind of like one shot at this, and so we want to make sure that we really do that. So that's part of the beauty, and one of the reasons I do what I do and talk to all the women that I speak with, because I learn every day. So when you talked about how you were healing through all of this, that's what we do.
Mm.
Growth is healing. Success is healing. All of it means that you are becoming better at what you do and who you are and how you help others around you. And as soon as you said the words radical responsibility, I'm like, that is the title of the episode, because it just is so important for us to hear that it's okay, number one, to take responsibility for me. And it's
Mhm.
also okay to not take responsibility for you.
Yes, it is.
And it is the easiest way to draw a boundary and the most kind and gracious way to draw a boundary that I've ever experienced. I just didn't know what to call it. And now I know what to call it.
Now you know what to call it. You know
Now
what?
I know what to
Thank you for sharing everything that you just shared. And I know everybody can resonate with that. And when you look at it, you think, like, I often think, if somebody speaks to me in the way that I do when I'm having a rant, am I going to listen? Chances are no. Like, I'm not going to. I'm not. I'm going to probably do the opposite because it's just how I'm wired.
Uh,
So sometimes we have to stop ourselves and go, wait, is this behavior actually going to create change? Like, it's not. It's not. Like, the louder I'm screaming, is it working? It's not
yeah.
working. Like, to get to a space and recognize that everything I was doing was not working. and
Yeah.
I needed to do something different. And
Yeah.
that's ownership and radical responsibility. It's okay to recognize that, wait, my way's not working. It's just not.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, Marsha, we're if you go to the podcast, all of her information is in the show notes. I can copy some of that into the YouTube notes for this particular guest speaker series. I've put your website here. And how would you like to close it out today? Is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to share, or anything special that you want people to know as they, because some people may not need a coach. Some people just need a couple of pointers before they move forward.
Mm-hmm. I think that there's so many things, but I think to keep it super simple is I have documented a lot of my journey in my podcast. So there's years of teaching tools that are there to share how I created change. If you're somebody who is listening to this and says, I actually really feel called to learn how to speak or to write or to share my story, like that's the work that I am so grateful to do. And there's lots more people who are doing it now too. It's becoming so much more normalized, which I love in seeing people sharing difficult and vulnerable stories in such a powerful way. If you feel called to, then follow that calling. If you don't feel called to, but your story is holding you back, then dig in and do the work. Because honestly, the freedom that is available on the other side of letting go of the meaning and the definition of that story that you're giving it. Because I always say, the story only ever has the meaning that you give it. It does.
Yeah,
I could easily
exactly.
say I failed. That's what I felt like for the longest time. I failed as a
Yeah.
parent. That story did not serve me.
Yeah.
And so the story only ever has the meaning that you give it. So you deserve more. You deserve to let go of the things that are not serving you. And someone somewhere is always praying for the solutions you're holding on to.
So share them, people.
Share 'em.
So let's
Learn
share
how
them.
to.
So thank you so much, Marsha Vanwynsberghe, for coming on today. And thank you for tuning in to the guest speaker series. Again, you can find Marsha's story on episode 102 of the Intentional Optimist Unconventional Leaders podcast. And I will see you the next time with our next guest. Have a great one.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye-bye.